Hey everyone, welcome to our first ever Zoom online class. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. We've done lots of video classes, but this is our first ever live Zoom class. So I'm so thankful that you guys are here. We're gonna have a lot of fun. So let's jump in and get started. The first thing I wanna do is kind of walk you through our kit of what you have included in your kit. Now, if you register for the class without the kit, you have gotten the supply list that I gave you, but let's have a look at what's in your kit. So my supplies are already kind of laid out, but the first thing you have is our watercolor worksheets that we have 4 pages. We're going to go through start to finish. And the next thing is your watercolor cakes. You have this number 6 round paintbrush. You have a Pigma Micron 05. That's my favorite felt tip pen. Archival ink, really great, even for things other than artwork. And you have a pencil, best pencil in America. And then you have some chipboard, which is what we're going to be using to tape down our painting later with masking tape that you have or scotch tape. And you can use both sides of this for when we tape down our pages. And then you have one sort of 8x10 size paper that this is what we're going to be doing our practice work on. So when we are doing the first few pages of the worksheets, you'll use this big sheet to practice on. You can use the front and the back and just use all of it up. And then for the next section, we will use these two, one for the pear, one for the clouds. At the end of the class. And then let's talk a little bit about watercolor cakes and the different kinds of watercolor. We have this 36 cake. This is a great beginner set of watercolor cakes. There's lots of different colors and I love it because it's beautiful and vibrant. Now, if you got into watercolors and really wanted to start a career in watercolors or something like that, you're gonna move to a higher end set that's more archival. This is a travel set by Winsor & Newton, but this is sort of a higher quality watercolor, a slightly different texture. These definitely have a chalky texture. This is more of a true watercolor texture, but it's the same concept of mixing from dry with water. And then the last type of watercolors that you have are these tube watercolors, and these are similar to a watercolor or an acrylic paint that comes in a tube that you squirt out. It is wet in texture and you mix it in a similar way as you would acrylic or oil paints. And then let's look at our brushes for a minute. So this is the round brush that you have in your kit. And this is a great size for the size that we're working on. And you can do a lot with this brush, and I'm going to teach you a little bit about that later. Another kind of brush that's good for watercolors is called a mop brush. And I actually don't use these a lot, but they're really great for doing wash backgrounds, things like that. You can fill a lot of space with a mop brush, and it's great for background work and that. So if you're gonna buy another brush, maybe get a mop brush and this round brush, but this is the one we're gonna be using tonight. So paper choices, you guys have a cold pressed 140-pound paper. So this is like a middle of the road watercolor paper. And you can see like on the paper that I gave you, the texture that is a little more smooth and less uniform is the front that we'll be using. A hot press paper is a little bit smoother, but this is what we have. And this is what I always use if I do watercolor. So I want to show you a couple pictures of the work that I've done, just to kind of give you an idea. So the type of style that I do, you would call like a line and wash, which is basically where you outline. It's used a lot in like illustration and that type of thing. So you'll see a lot of my scripture doodle is a lot of what I do in watercolor, and it has a line and a wash is what it's called. But we'll show another style of watercolor, but these are kind of signature is like the outline of the felt tip pen, which is what you guys have. And we'll be doing a little bit of that, but we're going to learn the other style as well. So as you look at these, you can see like the highlight and shadow is really what kind of makes a piece of artwork come alive. This is a scripture doodle I did years and years ago. This is a little bit of a more detailed one. So you can get really detailed with watercolor. You can get really bright hues. I used to think like you can't get bright paint with watercolor, but you can. It just takes a lot of layers and kind of adding more paint than you do water. So really with watercolor, paint and water are the main things you have. You don't have white and you do have black, but when you want a bright color, you're going to almost subtract that. And the white is going to be your background. So these are kind of bright. This is what I did. And you can see, you can get this variation with the different tones of blue with these watercolors. I actually think I did use this set for this piece. So you can get those really dark colors when you want to. It just takes lots of layers. A couple others that I did just to kind of give you an idea of the style of work that I do. So it's a fun one. And this one, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I used a like a gold ink, and that kind of got that iridescent, like with watercolor, you're not going to get that shiny color, but if you use an ink, you can get that. So that's what I use in this one on this little section. And then this is watercolor as well. And you can see we're going to practice a wash today. And this is that sort of wash style. Okay, that's it. All right, let's get started. Okay, we're going to go back down, start right here on the sketching section. So these are just some pro tips. Okay, so when we're sketching, we're going to sketch in a few minutes. It's important to use a light pressure with your pencil. Okay, so I did like a little example for you to see. I don't know if you can see this well on the camera, but if you look up close to this, I did sort of a dark outline of my pencil, and you can sort of see that. But on this side, with a light pressure and just really sketching lightly for your outline that you give as a guide first, then it doesn't show as much. So this almost has like a more cartoony feel when you have that dark outline with your pencil. So that's the tip. We're going to use light outline when we do that in a few minutes. So just keep that in mind, okay? And then when we layer our paint, we're going to layer from light to dark. You're going to start with your light tones, and then we're going to move to add darker colors on top, which we're all going to do together, and I'll remind you of as we paint. But light to dark, and the reason why that is because you can't cover up really with watercolor. Like if you're using acrylic paint, you can add white on top of anything that you mess up or on top of your darker colors, but with watercolor, you really can't do that. So you're going to start with light tones, and then we're going to fill in the dark tones on top, and we're going to leave space for the highlight, which I'll walk you through as well, because that highlight is going to come from using the white background of the paper. Okay. The last thing is let your paint dry between layers. So when you are layering on, if you put layers of paint on top of wet paint, it will sort of like your paper will sort of get pills on top of it. And you'll notice that really quickly if you're using like a cardstock paper. The watercolor paper that we have is a little more hardy, but when you layer paint on top of wet paint, it kind of gets messy and muddy. So that's when you pause and you let your paint dry between layers. Okay, so I already said there's no white in watercolors. There is that's kind of a lie these days, but we're not going to use white. But if you really get into watercolors and you want to have that highlight, you do have a couple options. You can use a white gel pen, which is really common, to do that little highlight of like the highest highlight in an eye, or some sort of highlight in like a shine from a reflection. And then there's something that you can get called masking fluid, which is something that you paint down almost like a rubber. It dries right away. You paint down on your surface first, and then you paint your watercolor on top, and then you pull it off, and it will reveal the blank paper that hasn't been touched with watercolor at all. So masking fluid is something you can use if you really get into watercolor and you want to have that white highlight with you. Okay, lastly, the last pro tip is we're going to tape our paper down, which is why you guys have the chipboard. And if you have masking tape or Scotch tape, that's what we're going to use that for at the end. But you can tape your paper down at a frame with like a 1/4 inch border, and that's going to keep your paper from like rippling or curling up. And it also is going to give you a clean line on the edge of your paper when you're done, where you can kind of pull that off. That's why you have the chipboard. And that's another pro tip of taping your paper down with a frame so that your paper doesn't ripple or mess up. Okay, how's everybody feeling? You guys feeling good? About to get into it. Okay, so let's get to page 2 on the worksheets. And we're going to do a little color theory practice. So if you don't have a little dish of water yet, go ahead and get that. Here's mine. You guys can see it on our frame. I use like a little side dish, but it's a low profile edge, which I like with watercolor because I can kind of go straight back and forth on my paper towel and to my cakes when I need to. But get your water if you don't have water, get a paper towel if you don't have a paper towel. Then we're going to move to our, keep your worksheets handy, but I want you to move to your little, it's like an 8x10 piece of watercolor paper and the textured side on the front. Okay, so here's your little color theory wheel. All right, so red, yellow, and blue are the primary colors. All right, so these are the main colors that can't be mixed. They come in nature. So if you are really poor and you can only afford 3 colors of paint, you're going to get red and yellow and blue. And those are 3 because you can mix all the colors from red, yellow, and blue. So those are the primary colors. And then the secondary colors, which you guys probably all know this. So just sip your coffee and just listen. But the secondary colors are green, orange, and purple. Okay. And so it makes sense how it looks on the wheel. So red and blue are going to mix your purple. Red and yellow are going to mix your orange, and then yellow and blue are going to mix your green. And so that's how you mix the secondary colors, which is what I do here. The cool thing about what we have is we have all the colors. So we're not going to have to do a ton of mixing tonight, but that would be, if you were poor and you only had the 3, you could mix all the colors from the red, yellow, and blue. So the next are, stick with me, okay, harmonious colors. I always call them analogous, but they're also called harmonious colors, which is like self-explanatory because they make harmony together, okay? So harmonious or analogous colors are next to each other on the color wheel. So when we are painting our pear in a few minutes, okay, when we want to change the tone of this green that we're going to create, we're going to use the harmonious color next to it, or the analogous color. So we're going to use, maybe add a little yellow if we need a brighter green in our pear, or we're going to add a little blue if we want it to be more teal. So these colors are friends. They work really well together. You can mix them and they always look pretty. Okay. If you mix complementary colors, you got to be careful. Okay. That's where it gets a little wild. So harmonious colors next to each other on the color wheel. So yellow, green, blue, red, violet, blue, and then red, orange, yellow. Okay. Keep that in mind. We're about to get to the really fun part. Okay. Complementary colors are colors that are opposite on the color wheel. Okay. So these colors are really good. They pop when they're next to each other. That's why you see this a lot in like, how many like sports fans do we have? Okay. So the Broncos are blue and orange, right? There's a lot of like ECU, all my Carolina fans, yellow and purple. So these colors are seen a lot in design or like sports teams because they pop when they're next to each other in design, but they don't mix well together. So if you look at this red and green, okay, Christmas, hello, but when you mix red and green, you're actually going to get a brown. So this is great to be next to each other, but when you mix them together, you have to be careful. However, when you are adding shadow to a color, okay, I'm going to show you this so you can see for a little bit. All right, so I have some green. You guys need to be mixing this. Okay, cool. So a note about these watercolors, and you guys can do this with me. If you want to get your piece of paper out, your watercolor paper, see if you can do this. Let's all do this together. Okay, it's gonna be fun. So I have a little green, and these cakes are dry. Okay, like a dry cake. So you're definitely going to need a little bit of water on them. So I always tell my kids, water, paint, paper. So you're going to put your brush in the water, and then you're going to get to your paint cake, and then you're going to put it on your paper. Okay, so I have this like vibrant green right here. So you can put your vibrant green down on the paper. And then if I want to darken this green, add a little shadow on it, I can use a little bit of red. Okay, so you see me moving to this, and I'm going to lay this next to it. And you can see that it's kind of darkening the green. Now it can easily go haywire, okay, and not look beautiful, but it will give you a darker green, especially if you get into acrylics. This is a great way to like darken your tones. Now, the good thing about what we have going on right here is that we have all the colors next to us, but in a pinch, and really when you get deeper into painting, you're going to use that complementary color to darken the tone. Okay, I'm going to show you with yellow as well. And yellow can get real tricky. Another thing you might want to do, which I don't always do, but if you get into watercolor, sometimes it's nice to have a second, like a clean water dish that you can use to mix so that you can put that in your clean water. I don't do that a lot, but I've heard it's a good idea. Okay, this is a yellow, which is kind of looking very bright on the screen. But if I want to darken that color a little bit, now, because I have all these tones, I would probably just go to this gold and darken it. But if I wanted to kind of give a shadow color on it, so like if the banana was sitting next to a table and it needed a darker tone, you could put a little violet on it, and that is going to darken the yellow as well. Can you guys see that? It's almost really similar to this gold color that comes in, but it is darkening that yellow. So when you have a complementary color, that's going to be your shadow color. It's going to help you darken your yellow without, like your natural thought is like, oh, I'm going to use black, but you're actually not going to use black because it's going to lose the intensity of your color. It's going to lose like the trueness of your color, and it's going to move it to black too fast. So complementary color to add a shadow. That's a bonus. Okay. Next, let's practice some color blending. Okay, so I do want everyone to do this with us. We're going to go color to white. And when we do our clouds in a few minutes, when we get over to this one, this is where this is all going to come in handy. So we are going to blend this blue to white when we are doing these clouds. So that's why we're practicing this color to white. So I'm using red, or that's what you have on your sample page. You have this red. So I'm going to do that. You don't have to do red. You could really use any of the colors on your palette, whatever one is speaking to you. So get your brush wet. Get your brush wet, and then choose whatever cake you're going. I'm going to go with this pinkish red, and we're going to see how it goes. And you're probably noticing if you're using these same cakes that they are dry. Like I said, they definitely have like almost like a chalky texture to them when they're dry. So you can you want to get a good bit of water on them to get them wet. All right. So, and the thing about watercolor is it's really the amount of water that you are using on your brush that you're adding to your tone that is going to give you a light color or an intense color. So the more water you have, the lighter your color is, the more of a pastel-y sort of wash you're going to get. The less water you have, the more intense color you're going to get. You're going to get a more sharp. So I got this pink. What color are you guys using? Anyone else using this pink color? All right, so then we're going to blend over. So I just have this dark tone. Start with a dark tone of whatever color you're using. And once you get that on there, then I want you to watch me. I'm just really going straight to my water. And it looks green, but it's going to be okay. I'm dabbing just a little bit of, you can see that color come off. I'm dabbing it just a little bit in my water. And then I'm actually going to go over back to my pink cake just one time. And I'm going to see if I'm getting a slightly lighter tone. Okay. I'm not getting too much of a lighter tone. So that means I need a little more water. I'm taking a little bit of this color off my brush, but I'm not taking all of it off. Just a little bit. Let's see. This time I didn't go back to the cake at all. And if you have too much on your brush, go ahead and just wipe it off on your paper towel. And then now I'm going to go back to my water and dab a little bit of water on there. And then I'm going to spread this. I'm just spreading the pink that's already on my paper. I'm not adding any more. Okay. So you're just taking just water on your brush and you're spreading this paint over. So now I've moved all the water off of all the tone off of my brush. I'm going to go back into the water and I'm just going to keep on spreading this paint out. Is that working for you guys? Okay. So the goal is to kind of get all the way to the white. So now I'm going to dab my brush. If you ever have too much water on your brush, you're going to get this kind of wash that goes wild and it goes everywhere and you can't control it and it's going to stress you out. That just means you have too much water on your brush. So Just don't freak out. Take your brush, dab it on the paper towel, and the paper towel is going to soak up that extra water that you have. So now, right now, my brush is dry. I'm going to take it over to my water and dab a little bit of water on there. I have no color on my brush right now. I'm just getting water, and I'm going to come back to this lightest tone, and I'm just going to spread it out a little bit more. Okay. You guys doing okay with that? I can see you if you want to give me a little thumbs up. Okay. All right, let's go a little bit lighter. I'm going to go one more lighter all the way. The goal is just to get completely white, if you will, all the way to white. Okay, so let's see. I'm kind of done. If you see my spread, keep going, take your time. But this is sort of, we're doing just like a color blend, if you will, where we're trying to give a gradient tone from dark to light. And that is really, so like if you were using acrylic paint or oil paint right now, instead of taking color off of your brush, you would actually be adding white to your color. Okay, so if you get into acrylics, instead of taking water off of, or taking tone off of your brush and using the water, you're going to be using white paint. So that's the only difference really between, well, there are a lot of differences, but that's one of the main differences between watercolor and acrylic. Okay, so if you have this beautiful gradient left to right, you know, dark to light, it's because you've added a good amount of water. Don't stress out if it's like you have like two tones and white. You will get better at that as you go. But you know, if you really like this class, and then take another day this week and try to blend like dark to light and see how you do. Try to get like 4 to 5 different tones. And if you see mine, you can see like, oh, these are all kind of the similar, but you did sort of get to that last almost white. Okay, so that's the key, just to review. When you're trying to lighten your color, you're taking that paint off of your brush by slowly moving back and forth from the cake to the water to the paper. Okay, y'all feeling good? Y'all feeling good? Okay. All right, so now we're gonna go from color to color. All right, so if you see on your little page 2 at the bottom right corner, we have, I went from red to yellow. Okay, this is when you're going to use the harmonious color, that analogous color that's next to each other on the color wheel. So you'll see like my color wheel right here, I am actually blending. You're almost going to blend from 3 colors. Now I could go from red to orange, but it's going to have a more beautiful blend, a more impactful blend to go from red all the way to yellow. Okay, so choose a harmonious combo that you have right here. I am going to go red to yellow, but blue to yellow would be really pretty. So with red to blue, it's a little bit, those are darker tones, so a little bit harder to see, but I'm going to go from red to yellow. Okay, so the red that I think is best for this, that's on the cake, is probably this guy right here. And you'll notice I'm mixing really on my cakes a lot, which is just a style. You can get a palette, like a plastic palette, really cheap, and you can mix on your palette. That's really just like a preference. But if you are a tidy friend and you like to have your cakes nice, baby wipes are your friend. So these will like clean off really well with baby wipes, or they'll clean off really well with a paper towel that's wet. But I'm going to mix all my cakes, which you're going to see. All right, so let's go over here, and I'm going to try to get an intense color. So water, paint, and kind of go back and forth so you get a good lather on this cake. And then we're going to put down our red. This is a nice dark red. Mine almost looks more orange, like a rust in person, but this is a good red too, if you want to use that. So the goal, okay, let's try to do this with just yellow. Now I know later we would move straight to this orange, but I want to kind of get a feel for if we only had 2 colors to mix from, go to the outside. I'm not going to know if you do it in the orange, it's totally fine. But if you want to challenge yourself and flex your muscles, we're going to go over to this yellow. Okay, we're going to get a little bit of this yellow. I have not taken the red off of my brush. I dabbed it in the brush or in the water a little bit, and I came back to the yellow, and I'm just a little bit kind of lathering that yellow into my red. I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to change the tone. See how that changes a little bit? And then we're going to do it again. I'm going to go back to my water, dab it in my water. I'm not getting all the paint off, but I am getting a good bit off. And then we're going to go back to the yellow. adding more. We're just adding more yellow. We're really not taking any of the red away. Okay. And you can see how this is changing. It's getting lighter and lighter. Now I am going to dab in the water. I'm going to try to get a little bit off. I think you can see that. And I'm going to go back to the yellow, and just keep going till you can get a lighter and lighter tone. So now I can see it is getting lighter. And I don't really want to necessarily do like a pastel tone. I want to get back to this bright yellow. So keep going back to the yellow. And I'm going to change our tone. Now I'm going to get in the water a little bit, and I'm going to move just to my yellow. How's that going for you guys? Is it going good? All right, we're going to move all the way to that yellow. And this kind of gives you a good blend, red to yellow. Now this is sort of a golden yellow. I could keep going. And at this point on my cakes, if I wanted a brighter yellow, I could move over to this guy. And I would move back and forth from this golden yellow to the bright yellow and get an even brighter tone of yellow. At some point, you need to move to a lighter tone or you can't get any brighter. But that kind of gives you a blend, red to yellow, and you get this orange in the middle. And we really did that by just using these two colors and slowly adding more and more yellow to the red. Okay, or whatever color you were using. So if you were using blue or yellow to, yellow to blue or red to blue, same deal, same concept. What you'll notice with like if you're using the red to violet, that's a really intense color. Both of those are really intense colors. So yellow is not as strong of a color. It's maybe a little bit easier to mix. But if you're using red to blue, you'll notice it can get really dark really fast. So in that case, you can add a little water and kind of lighten it up a little bit. Okay, water is your friend, or it is your foe. If you use too much, it's gonna make you mad, but it is gonna be your friend a lot of times when you get comfortable with it. Okay, all right, how's everybody feeling? Does anyone have any questions? Let's pause for questions, and I hope I can hear you. Nobody has a question. Okay. Oh, you do? Okay. Is your mic on?
Hi, this is Amy.
Hi. Hey, Amy.
Good to see you. Could you do a blend from yellow to red, or do you always have to start with the darker color and go?
That's a great question. No, you don't. You can definitely go from yellow to red. You don't always have to go red to yellow. And it might be a little easier to go from red to yellow, but you definitely don't have to. And that would be like a fun thing to play around with and see like, okay, is it harder to go because red is a stronger color than yellow? It might be a little easier. My instinct would go from the primary color to the secondary color. Oh no, they're both primaries. My instinct would be to go from the more intense color to the less intense color, which in this case is, yellow to red, or if you were going blue to yellow. But see, red and blue are both pretty intense. I would say blue is a little bit more strong of a color, but no, you definitely don't have to. That's a great question. Does anyone else have a question? I love that we can have questions. I'm made for live, y'all. I'm made for interaction.
What do you do if you put too much water on your?
Yeah. Okay. If you use too much water, just take a deep breath. Okay. Remind yourself that you're learning. And then I would say that definitely happens to me all the time. So a good thing to do that. If you watch, I'll show you if I have too much water on. So are you saying, Caitlin, that you're, like it went wild on your paper like this, or it just made your color too light?
No, it did that.
It did that. Okay. So it just means what I do in that situation, which has happened to me a lot, I'm going to go back to my paper towel and I'm just going to dab it on my paper towel, and the paper towel is going to suck up that extra paint and water. And it's probably not going to change your tone too much, but it is going to change. So like if you can see that, you can see it's way more controlled now because there's less water on it, but it's also a little bit of a lighter tone. So I'm going to go back to my water and mix back to this green that's already here. And you're not going to get an as intense, but it is more controlled. So in this case, if I'm like, well, crap, now I have this I don't have too much water, but my color is too dark, right? So then I'm going to go back to my cake without going to the water. Okay, so I already have water in my brush. I'm going to go back to the cake because there's already a little bit of water on here because I just put the water on there. So I'm going to go back to my cake. And I'm going to come back on top. And then I'm going to get my dark tone again. But yes, that will happen. And it just means I'm going to go back to my paper towel and it's going to suck up that extra water. Sound good? Okay, does anyone else have any questions? I probably have room for one more. You got it. Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, let's move to page 3. Now we're gonna get our muscles moving with our brush technique. Okay, so now we're not going to focus too much on color right now, but we are going to practice our brush progress, and then we're going to move to our just checking the time. We're going to move to our actual like our pear and our clouds. All right, so I'm going to flip my paper over and use the other side. I don't know how much y'all use that. This is the last thing. This is the last page we're going to use this big sheet for. So if you feel like you're running out of room, don't stress. You have enough. We'll just use the back of that page and then we'll move to our smaller 5x7s. Okay, so now we're going to practice brush checking. So how do you hold a paintbrush? Okay, I'm going to show you my overhead now. All right, so the standard way that I hold it is I'm going to hold it like a pencil. I'm going to hold it a little bit looser. So when you're stressed out and you're holding your pencil like hard and tight, you have like more jerky movements, and watercolor is sort of like a loose style anyway. So I'm going to hold it slightly farther up my brush and I'm holding it sort of loosely, but I am holding it like a pencil. Another way you can do that is like this, by flipping it this way, which sometimes in drawing, like if I'm doing a wash, well, in drawing, if I'm shading, I'll do this. But if I'm doing a wash, sometimes you might go like this, but I pretty much hold it like this all the time. I don't choke it like I did, you know, if you're small, but if you want to get down in there, you can hold it closer, but loose pressure. Okay, so now we're going to practice kind of getting the most out of this brush. We're going to practice creating a really thin line. Okay, and that's done by using light pressure. So choose a color on the palette. It doesn't matter which one, whatever color you love, choose your favorite color. You're going to get the water, paint. You're going to get a good lather on your brush. And we're going to get a little water in there. We don't want too much. Remember that situation where it pools and it gets wild. We don't want too much. So if you're nervous that you already have too much water on your brush, what you can do is you can just go straight to your paper towel before you even go to your paper, which in this case, it doesn't matter as much, but sometimes when you're working on a finished product and you don't want to like mess up something that's on your final piece, you can dab it on that paper towel first, and then you're going to get a safe amount of paint on your brush. Okay, so let's try that. We're going to use just this light pressure. We're using just the tip of the brush. Okay, and we're going to go make a line across like this. Mine's a little shaky. If your hand is shaky, I will sometimes like have my elbow, hold my elbow down, or my pinky as sort of like a little anchor. And also if your hand's shaky, just shake it out. If you're stressed out, remind yourself this is just for fun. But we're going to get this light line. I want you to do a couple of those. And if your line is too thick, that means that you're pressing too hard, or maybe your brush is too like parallel to the paper. You can hold this sort of like a pencil. See how I'm holding it kind of upright and I'm getting that light line. And to get a thicker line, you're going to press down hard on your brush. So I want you guys to do this with me. So go back to your paint cake. And now we're going to try getting a dark line and a heart, you know, like a thicker line. All right, so this time we're going to press down a little bit harder and we're going to use the whole brush. You see how I'm using like the side of the brush, pressing down hard, and I'm getting this thicker line that I want. Now you can see right here, I'm running out of water and I'm running out of paper. So when you are doing watercolor, and this actually applies to acrylics as well, it means you don't have enough of something on your brush. You don't have enough. In the case of watercolor, you probably don't have enough water or paint, but you might just need some more water. So go back to your water and dip it back in there, and you can go back over this line you've already created. And that kind of kept the same tone. Now, if I had gone back to the cake, It doesn't really matter in this case because we're just practicing. But if I go back to the cake, it's going to get me a darker tone, which is okay unless you're trying to keep that same tone that you already have. So my first instinct would be go back to the water, give yourself a little dab, and kind of go back over what you've already done. That's how you're getting that thick line. You're pressing down hard and you're using the whole side of the brush. And if you get these little white spots, your brush is too dry, go back to the water and or go back to the cake. Okay. Now we're going to do one more little thing. I'm going to skip these little baby ticks right here. It's the same technique, but the next thing we're going to do is this little like loop-de-loop situation. I guess it's more of like a cursive, almost like a cursive end, but we're really just going to practice that flip from thin line to thick line, which you really aren't going to use a ton of, but if you got into like brush lettering or something, this would be like a great thing to learn and know. Okay, so we're going to use that thin line on our upstroke, so light pressure, thin line. Okay, and then we're going to press down to get that thick stroke going down. So kind of create this little wave of thick downstroke, thin upstroke, thick downstroke. You're pressing down hard and then you're lifting up and you're going on a thin line with light pressure to get that upstroke thin line. This is a great exercise to do if you get into brush lettering or something like that. Faux calligraphy, well, not faux calligraphy, but a brush lettering is really popular right now. That's a great practice to do. So just a recap on that technique, you're going to use the tip of the brush with light pressure to get a thin line, and you're going to use the whole side of the brush with a heavier pressure to get a thick line on your paper. Okay. Now we're going to practice a wet on wet wash. Okay, so this is something that we're going to use when we move to our clouds. Okay. So I told you the kind of watercoloring that I do is called a line and wash, which is a little bit different. And I usually put watercolors straight onto a dry surface. Okay. That's just the style that I use. And it's more natural to acrylic painting, which is what my main medium is. So that's kind of why I do that. It's more just a preference. And when you get into watercolor, you'll figure out what you like. The wet on wet wash that we're going to practice right now is very good for background work. So if you are using this mop brush and you're kind of creating a background, remember, we're going to move back to front and light to dark. So we're going to move back to front, light to dark. So when you're creating this background of the clouds that we're going to do in a second, we're going to start with the background and move forward. But we're going to do this wet on wet wash right now, which means, get a new piece of paper. We're going to a little bigger so that y'all can see. So hopefully you find somewhere on your page that you can do this. The wet on wet wash means you're going to start with water, just water on your page. Okay, so I am going to my water in my dish, and I'm just going to create you can see my brush water was a little bit wet or dirty. So you can see it's kind of pink. And I think I had purple on my brush last, but I'm going to create this background. I'm wetting the paper. That's why it's called wet on wet. Okay. And then I'm going to take my color and I'm going to go on top of my wet and create a wash. Okay. So I'm going to use a blue because a lot of times if I'm doing a wash, I'm using a blue because I'm doing sky or something like that. So I'm using this blue over here, which is a really dark blue. Don't have to use that blue, whatever you want, but I have this pretty wet, and then I'm going to go onto a wet paper, and I want you to see how that kind of pools and goes wild. Okay. The cool thing about a wet on wet wash is you are almost creating this playpen within your surface where your paint is going to go, but it's probably not going to go past this sort of safe zone that you've given it right here around the edges. And but it is going to pull and sort of spread sort of that capillary action that you learn about in science class, because you've already given it this playpen of water. Now I'm going to, just for fun, I want to show you if I'm blending and using analogous colors, harmonious colors. I'm going to move to this green, and I haven't cleaned my brush off too much, but I have a little bit. I'm going to put this green next to this blue on the wet already. And this is sort of how you create this blend wash And these colors are looking really nice together because they're harmonious. They are next to each other. So maybe for you, if you're using red, move to an orange, or same thing when we did that practice, like color to color, choose a harmonious color and create a second blend on your wet on wet wash, just to kind of get used to it. Now, for me over here, my wet is already dry. So I'm going to come back and add a little bit more, clean my brush out, add a little bit more of just this wet background. And then I'm going to use my green and I'm going to go over this wet, and it's going to do that same thing. This is giving you like a loose color. Now, if it's too dark, you just get more water on it and you're going to spread it out a little bit more and mix it together. This is called a wet on wet wash. And this is going to be great for background work. It's going to be great for, we're going to use that when we do our clouds later this afternoon or later in the class. Okay. How did you guys like that? It's kind of fun. That's a great way. If you're doing like a pretty wash background, it's like my go-to. I went through a season where I did a lot of like abstract watercolor wash type of things. And the wet on wet was really fun because you just are kind of giving the paint this opportunity to just go wild a little bit. Okay. Next, we're going to practice something called a dry brush technique. So this is great for creating texture on top of your work. So we're going to use this a little bit when we do our pear. Okay, you can see that a little bit up here. I didn't use a ton of it, but it's the whole idea is you're basically putting an almost dry brush on top of paint that has already dried. Okay, so it's important that this background, I'm using this like goldenrod color right here. And I want you guys to do that as well. Give yourself a wash of some sort of color, not the wet on wet wash. Just take a color straight to your dry watercolor paper. And I want you to make a little blob, and we're going to let it dry right now. Okay. And then we're going to come back in a few minutes and we're going to create this dry brush technique is what it's called. But essentially you're using an almost dry brush on top of a dried surface of paint. This is great if you're like drawing an animal with hair. I don't paint I don't paint very many animals. I do have a really cute dog, but this is great for like, if you are putting hair or sort of texture. We're going to do it on the pear a little bit, but we're going to let that dry. And at the same time, I want you to do a blue. We're going to practice. We're going to move to lifting out. Okay. And we're going to do a little blue blob right here. And then I'm going to talk to you about what lifting out is. And by then our goldenrod is going to be dry. Okay. All right. So the lifting out is your friend. Okay. This is what you do when you make a mistake. I mean, you really can't erase watercolors. Okay. That's the struggle. You can't erase them. Well, but you can, because you have this lifting out that you're going to learn, but you can't go over it in white like you can if you are doing acrylics or oils or something, but you can lift out a little bit. So I'm going to show you, we're going to make a little mistake. Okay. And I'm going to make an ugly mistake with like a reddish blue. You see that mess up? And I showed you this on the bottom of the page, so you can see this, but the idea is you have a mistake that you've made. Okay. So pretend you have a mistake, put your little line on there in your complementing color, some color that doesn't mix well. Okay. And then you're going to clean your brush off all the way. So it's clear with water. Okay. Then what you're going to do is you're basically using this water to lift out. I know, such a crazy technique. You're lifting out that mistake color. Okay. And then you want to get your paper towel handy. I should have told you that ahead. I'm so sorry. Okay. You're going to get your paper towel handy and you're going to lift it out and you're going to sort of press it down onto that color, and it's gone. Do you see how it's gone? How awesome is that? So when you make a mistake, you're going to take a deep breath. You're going to wet your brush and clean all the color off of it. And then you're going to lift it out by kind of brushing back and forth onto your busted up color. And then you're going to dab it with a paper towel or a tissue or a Q-tip or like cotton balls, some sort of cotton, surface. It's going to suck it up and it's going to get the color out of there. And then you can come back once that's mostly dry, and you can come back with that same blue or whatever color you were using, and you can go back onto your surface. And it was like, it was never there. It's like God's grace and forgiveness to your mistakes on paper. Okay. All right. So now our goldenrod is dry over here on the left. And then I'm going to take some questions, and then we're going to move to our two styles. I hope y'all are doing good. And if you are sitting here and you're like, this is a lot, this is too much, maybe just sit and watch and listen for a little bit. You can always watch this replay. You can watch this as much time as you want. So if it's feeling like a lot of content, just watch for a few minutes, and you can always rewatch and practice this another time. Okay. So, all right, so we're gonna practice our dry brush technique. So you can see I'm dabbing my brush on my paper towel, and I'm gonna use, like, you can see what I did on the one that's on your worksheets. It's sort of like, it would almost like a shadow color texture. Okay, so I'm using this, I'm gonna go to this rusty orange. I don't really know what I used before, but so you might be thinking, well, my cake is too dry now because my brush is basically dry. Well, that is true, but we just want a little bit of paint or a little bit of water on our brush. Okay, so we're gonna have our mostly dry paintbrush, and we're gonna moisten this cake just a tiny bit. Now, if you have too much water on your brush right now and you're like, crap, what are you gonna do? You're gonna dab it to your paper towel, and it's gonna suck up that extra water on there that doesn't need to be there for the dry brush technique. But you can see for me, when I'm dabbing mine right now, all I'm getting is little dots, and that's because my brush is almost all the way dry. Okay, so then I'm gonna come back. So by now you should have a damp brush with a little bit of color that is different than this. And I'm gonna do some little stripes on here. And mine is like not even, it's just really light. So when we do it on our pear, we might just be doing little dots. I went and dabbed a little bit of water on my brush because it felt almost too dry, and my brush didn't have any control because I had kind of like sucked all the life out of it. So you can go back and get the shape of your brush again, and you can do these little, hairs, so to speak, on there. And that's kind of how you do this dry brush technique. And you can do this in acrylic paint as well, but it's a great way to create texture on top of your watercolor. But it's important that you have a dry surface, and then that your brush is almost dry with a little bit of paint on it as well. Okay, and that's what we're going to be using just slightly in the line and wash when we do the pear in a few minutes. And the wet on wet is really what we're going to be using. Or the wet on wet, or was it over here? The wet on wet is really what we're going to be using for the clouds. Okay. Okay. How y'all feeling? Any questions? Does anyone have any more questions about brush technique, or the wash, or the wet on wet wash, or the lifting out, anything like that? Or any basic questions? If you do, make sure your mic is on. If you don't, it's okay. Okay. Awesome. All right, y'all. Now it's the moment of truth. We're going to try these two styles, and I'm going to talk you through this. Okay. So, I am going to talk you through start to finish these two little practices that we're going to do. And I just want to remind you, like this, you're learning this one technique. It's fun and different, and it's not about making a masterpiece, but you are going to get a little bit more comfortable with watercolor today. All right. So for the line and wash, we're going to work on a dry surface, this is the style that you saw when I showed you the samples in the beginning. This is the type of style that I always do. It's kind of characterized by that felt tip pen texture, which is either put on before. So like a lot of times, actually, when I do this, I will sketch in pencil, and then I outline what I've sketched with a felt tip pen. And I like a very clean image when I'm doing this style. So then I will actually erase my pencil lines. But if you're not erasing your pencil lines, that's when I showed you this I wish you could see this better, but it really is like, I have these like strong, like elementary, heavy graphite lines on this one. And on this one, I just did a really light sketch. And that is very important. If you want something that is really lifelike and soft and almost whimsical, you're gonna use that light pressure when we're sketching. Okay, so while I'm doing this, I want you to take your chipboard if you have a chipboard. If you don't have a chipboard, it's no big deal. You are gonna, you don't have to tape it down. This is really like a preference of, you know, your painting. So I want you to, if you have some kind of tape, I want you to tape it down. You can use Scotch tape. I often will use a masking tape for this. And don't you just love that sound effect? I use that a lot with, so when I use masking tape most of the time, and you can see I have this sort of like 1/4 inch border around my, it doesn't have to be perfect, but sometimes like if I'm doing, I do this a lot when I do my sheep portraits, I will measure like a 1/4 inch in to make sure it's very uniform. But for this type of situation, it's not important. Now, one thing you can do with the masking tape is sort of put your hand on it and take a little bit of the sticky off so that it's not so strong. And sometimes when you rip it off, it'll rip your page. So you have to be careful about that. But we're going to tape this out. And I already did my other one, but I wanted to do this with you so that you could see how it goes. I'm going to tape it out. And this, like I said in the very beginning of class, this keeps you from having rippled pages or curling edges. And it also gives you a smooth border, like a really nice strong border to your watercolor page. Okay, so actually, if you're doing this, I would encourage you to tape one on the front and one on the back, or just choose which one you're going to tape if you don't want to tape both of them. Chances are the first one, we're going to do the pear first. Chances are it will dry mostly so that you could flip it back over. But if you make a masterpiece on the pear and you don't want to mess it up, you can just choose to tape one of them. Okay, so we've taped our border, ready to go. And now we're going to grab our pencil. Finally, our pencil is going to get some skin in the game. Now, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, April, I am not a drawer. I can't draw this pear that's like so beautiful. Just think about like a circle-y type of oval. Okay. So really we're going to use light pressure. Okay. And I'm actually going to show you even like a cheat. So just do like a little wobbly circle, sort of. Can you even see that? My pressure is so light, you can barely see it. Okay. I did a little bit darker for you guys. So this circle, and I want to, you can see, have a look at your pear as you're doing it. And then we're going to make this point up here, slightly to the right is from me, it's to the right. And that's the point that I'm going to go to when I create my pear. And I'm going to start my line about right here. And I'm going to slowly curve up to that. Okay. You guys feeling good about that? And then I'm going to slowly curve down. And then I'm going to erase this line. All right. And then you have sort of a pear shape. And then I'm going to do a stem, which is just like a stick line. And then I'm going to do a little leaf, just sort of like a half, almost like a half moon type of shape with, I like this little curl in the end. And then I come back to the other side and just mirror that. Okay. And then I'm overlapping. This leaf is in the front of the pear. Okay. So I'm going to erase where I overlapped. Okay. And this is overlap, which we're not talking about overlap today, but overlap is a great way to create depth in your work and dimension, and it's taking it to the next level. Anytime you have something overlapping, you're kind of creating that. We're seeing that when we give our clouds that overlap. We have background, midground here, foreground, which is the most front ground. That overlap, it really makes it detailed and interesting and kind of next level. Okay, so then we're going to do like a little ground edge so that our pear is not floating. Okay, you guys feel good about your sketches? Did you use light pressure? If you didn't, I don't know, but next time a little lighter is good. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of talk you through how we're going to do this. Remember, we're going to start with our lighter tones. Okay, so if you look at this pair, the lightest tone that we have here is this. It kind of looks like an electric yellow on the color. It's this sort of like bright yellowy green. And I mixed that by using mostly this yellow. Okay, and the top, mine is the top right corner as to how I'm holding it, and a tiny bit of this green right here. Okay, just a tiny bit. And actually, we're mostly going to start with this yellow and see how it goes. All right, so our sketch is done. We're going to move back to our paintbrush and we're going to create these light tones. So we're going to work on a dry surface. So that's, to me, that's like most natural. So that feels good. Okay, I'm going to get my brush wet. All right, get it pretty wet. And then we're going to go up to this yellow right here and we're going to lather that cake pretty good. If it's not wet enough, go back to your water and lather it pretty good. And then I'm just going to take one dab to this green. Well, look at me. I'm going back and forth a little bit more. I'm just taking a little bit. I'm not covering on the whole brush, just a tiny bit. And then I'm going to go back to this yellow actually and get a little bit more of that. Okay. So now I'm probably, if you're not sure of your tone, a great thing to do in this situation is to test your tone. All right. So I have this little edge. So if you use the edge of the paint surface that you were practicing on and just test that a little bit. All right. And mine is pretty yellow. So it looks good to me, but I can already tell it's maybe a little bit too dark. So we're looking for a light tone. So I'm going to go back just to my water and I'm going to dab my water. You can see that the color kind of going out. I'm going to switch my water so you can see it clean. But I have less paint on my brush, but I have enough. And I'm going to go to this. This is bright, y'all. It looks so much brighter on the camera than it is. But I'm doing this shape that I've already drawn out. So there's no stress because I've already given myself guidelines. And I'm just going to stay in the lines. I'm on the color. So now what I'm going to do is I can tell like halfway through this, I'm kind of running out of paint on my brush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my paintbrush in the water and I'm just going to essentially re-lather what's already on here, which is probably what you should do, because then you know your tone is going to be the same as it was a second ago. It might be a little lighter, but you haven't lost anything if it's a little bit lighter. This pear is wildly bright. So if this is too bright for you, get a little bit more water on your brush and rinse off a little bit of that. Okay, so this is our base color on the pear. And if you want a good guide, you can keep the pear that I have on here in your view. Now, remember, if you already did it, it's too late, but remember that our leaf is the overlap on this pear. So I didn't do my leaf. I went just behind the background. I should have told you that before, but remember, we're working background to foreground, back to front. So I have this leaf that I haven't touched, and I have this middle of the road light yellow that's in my background, and it's drying right now. So now we're going to lay in our shadow on the bottom, and I'm going to use this ugly brownish gray here on the bottom. It's a great shadow color. Okay, and I'm going to test it, and if it's too dark, I'm going to go to my water and I'm going to rinse a little bit of that color off, but not all of it. And then I'm going to come back to my test and I can say, oh, that's lighter now. That's good, because you're adding more water to lighten your color. Right. So now a quick word on shadow. If my light is coming from here, my shadow is going to cast behind the shape. All right. Which on mine, I really didn't, I had my light in a different section, but let's just do it this way. Okay, so a little light shadow casting underneath the pear. Okay, and then let's come up here and we're going to use the end of our brush. I haven't moved any water off my brush. I haven't changed the tone at all. I'm just going to trace this stem. Now you can see how upright I'm holding the brush. You see how upright that is? And I'm using just the end. So if your brush is a little wild, take a minute to get it like tight, like a point. And actually mine, you can see I'm holding up right and actually have like, it's almost flat on one side, but it's thin. You see how thin it is right there? I'm just going to use the end with very light pressure to do the stem coming up off this pear. Okay, now this is the same color as my shadow. Yes, I'm going to add more to that later, but for now, I'm just giving a light base of the color. I'm also going to do this on the leaf, on the overlap. I'm not getting any more paint on my brush. I'm not getting any more water on my brush because I like this middle of the road light shadow. And I'm going to use this leaf, and we're just putting this on the bottom of the leaf. Okay. This is our shadow we're creating on the leaf. And the leaf is going to be green, but for now, it's just a shadow of this light medium brown color. And actually, we're going to do this on the pear as well. So let's come down here. We haven't touched no new paint, no new water. We're just going to use our brush, and we're going to brush on top of this pear, this bright yellow that we've already used. And you can see, okay, I'm not using a complementary color here, but I am using a darker shadow tone that I've already introduced in my picture. So it looks like it makes sense. It's supposed to be there. You know, it's a neutral. So neutral is great for shadow. And we're just creating this, we're following the shape of the pear. So I'm actually following these lines that I've already created in the pear. They're already there. And if you know, pears have that little hump, that little belly. So we're going to go back and forth. Let's do a little shadow in that center. And then maybe just one more line of this light. I'm using light pressure here. I'm barely touching it. All right, and you see we've got this like base shadow on our pear that's already, we're starting the framework of the shading. All right, now we're going to create a darker shadow. Remember, we're moving light to dark, back to front. So we started with this background, then we went to the frontmost thing right here on this pear is the leaf. It's in the most foreground. But we have this middle shadow, which would be this pear, and then the foreground at the end. But now we're going to add a little bit of our darker tones. So I'm not going to mix this yellow, but we are going to, let's move to, let's try this goldenrod color right here. And I think I want a little bit of this green as well. Okay, this bright green, but then we're also going to go back to our muddy gray back here. I'm trying not to move too fast, but we're back this goldenrod, which we haven't introduced yet. And this green, because we're going to introduce this green in the leaf in a minute. So I do want to have that in there, and then a little bit of this muddy gray. All right, and I'm going to dab it back in the water just once. And then let's test it out and see how it looks. Okay, cool. So we have this like muddy mix of this shadow color on this pear that's a little bit darker than our mid-tone, and it's way darker than our bright tone. And we're going to add this on top. So if you think you have too much water on your brush, you can dab it on your paper towel, but you've tested it, and we're just going to see how it looks. We're going to go on top, and you can see where I'm adding this, and you can add it with me. And I'm following these shadings I've already done, but I'm also adding a little bit more right here on this bottom left corner of the pear. But one of the things I'm seeing that I don't love is this like harsh change between the dark shadow and the bright highlight of this yellow. So what we're going to do is we are going to just add some water. Right, so I'm not cleaning my brush off. I'm not changing any of that gold, but I am moving some water on there to get a little bit off. And then I'm going to dab it on my paper towel to take almost all the water off. And I'm going to come back to you here, and I'm going to spread it. So what you're doing is you're taking this dark tone and you're spreading it onto the light. And you're kind of moving what's already there. Okay. And that is going to kind of create a nice blend, which we're also going to use when we do the clouds. You're creating a nice blend from the dark to light tone, the middle of the road. And you did that, just to remind you, by just getting water on your brush and spreading. I dabbed it off to dry it off, and you're spreading what's already there. Okay, and then we're gonna come back to this green. It's kind of bright green. And I want you to get this green on there pretty well. And you might dab it to the water and back to the goldenrod for just a minute. I'm looking for a middle of the road green that can be our leaf. We already have a shadow in our leaf, right? So we don't really have to create a new shadow, but this is why layering paint with watercolor is cool, because the bottom part of that leaf is already going to be darker because there's a layer of shadow under there already. Okay, do you see that? Like this bottom is already darker because I had that middle ground brown in there and I put it over top. And then I'm going to use just the tip again of my brush to add that green into my pear. And then we're going to go back, think back to the dry brush technique. So I want your brush to be like mostly dry. You still have this green on your brush from the leaf. And you're going to dab it mostly. Okay, and we're just going to create, you know, those little dots that pears have on them. We're going to create those in the green, which, you know, they might not actually be this green in real life, but I like it for this situation because it kind of continues that green that was already there from the leaf. So in that regard, you're creating this continuity in your piece that helps it make a little more sense visually. And you can see I'm adding a little bit of shadow. I'm spreading this green around the bottom of my pear. And I'm also going to shadow it with the green. It's going to just make it pop a little bit. Okay. Okay, so we're going to move from the pear because I want to have enough time to play with the clouds a little bit. And so what I would do, I'm actually not going to do this, but what I would do once this pear is all the way dry is I would take my felt tip pen and I would outline a little bit. Actually, I am doing it and I said I wasn't going to, but then I outline a little bit and I'm doing some dots. Just make sure that these watercolors dry really quick, but just make sure your watercolors are dry. And I'm really just outlining these lines that I've already done, I've already created on my paper, and maybe like a couple squiggles. That kind of makes it a little abstract. And then I wrote bear fruit. And it's just kind of fun. You don't have to do that. If you like the wet on wet wash, you might not want that line on there, but that's just my style. And you'll find your style. You'll figure out what you like. But the felt tip pen, that's really why it's in your kit. And it's actually a great pen. It's a really fun pen to use. I use it all the time. So, but that is the last step of the line and wash. Okay, does anyone have any questions? We have about 20 minutes left and I wish we could go way longer, but we're gonna do 20 minutes more and we're gonna practice the clouds. And at this point, if you're like maxed out on creativity, you can just watch the clouds happen and then you can practice them another day. We're gonna send that video out tomorrow, so you'll have the replay available tomorrow. But I'm gonna practice the clouds and then I am gonna do 2 little bonus watercolor techniques for texture that actually is going to go past the 90 minutes. So after the clouds, if you're like, that's all I had to give you is 90 minutes. You don't have to watch that part, but just to kind of give you an idea of what to expect in the next 20 minutes. You guys having fun? Did anyone have questions? How you guys feel like you're getting the hang of it? Anyone feeling overwhelmed? You're doing great. I can tell it. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the overhead. Now at this point, your pear should definitely be dry unless you got wild with the water, which is totally fine. If you did, as you get deeper into watercolors, you can be taping your cloud on there if you want to at this point on the back of your chipboard, or you could honestly pull off the pear and retape on the front if you don't want to flip it over. But I forgot what I was saying even. But oh, I know what I was gonna say. The deeper you get into watercolor, the more comfortable you're gonna get with this whole layering of paint, too much water, not enough water. So if you're feeling frustrated, just know that you're gonna get better, and you're just here to learn a couple tips and tricks, okay? So let's talk about this for a minute. I redid this for you a little bit bigger so you could see, and a little more vibrant so you could see. So I'm going to have this in the frame so that you can have a look at it where we're going. But we're going to talk through it a minute. This is a wet on wet. For the background specifically is what we're using for it. We're not going to do that for the whole part of it, but we are going to do it for the clouds and for the background. Okay, so we're going to do a little sketch on it. I'm actually probably going to simplify it a little bit for time's sake, but our goal here is to do a wash of a background in shape. And then I want you to just catch that there's 3 tones of clouds here. There's more tones, but mainly there's this highlight. Okay, there's this medium blue that is going to be our wet on wet wash, and then there's this dark shadow. And what I want you to notice is that the shadows of the clouds are on the bottom of the clouds. Okay, so this shadow is really underneath the cloud, and the highlight, which is not, watch, it's not paint. Okay, it's no paint, it's white paper. Okay, there's no, so you're not using white paint. So just remind yourself, that's probably the hardest thing. And honestly, I'm so used to painting in acrylics, so I almost have to like retrain my mind when I do something like these clouds, because it's so different. It's the absence of paint. So try just to do what I do as we create our wash, but remind yourself, this highlight that we're loving up here, it's the absence of paint. Okay, it's a white surface of just paper. Okay, and we're going to do this little cloud. We might do the tree, but mostly we're going to play with the clouds. And what we're going to do the mountain, and we're going to do the tree, but mostly we're going to play with the clouds. And I'm going to hold it up closer. You said I could. Okay, so you can kind of reverse. Wow, so good at this. Okay, so this kind of gives you like a better idea of the tones. You've got dark tone, the mid tone, and the blue tone. And now, lucky for y'all, for this one, we're really not going to be mixing much. I'm going to let you use those tones that are already on this beautiful palette that we have. Our wash is going to be in kind of a mixture of these. Actually, we'll just probably do it with this light blue. Then we're going to move to this medium tone. And by the time we get to this shadow, it's going to be a mix of this ugly grayish greenish blue and back to this blue. All right, so first things first, we're going to create a little oh, I said I would keep this in the frame for you guys, so sorry. I'm gonna get that much of it. All right, so we're really just going to focus on the clouds, and I think for time that's the best thing. So really just kind of giving ourselves a little guidelines. All right, so we're going to start at the top left corner of our page. We're going to just sort of create this diagonal wiggly line up to about here. Can you guys, I'm going to go a little dark so you guys can see it, but in real life, I wouldn't be doing it that dark. You should be using light pressure on your brush. Okay, so what we're creating is this guideline for this corner right here. Okay, then we're going to come down and we're going to do a little hump down like that. A little darker for y'all. And that is our line for this right here. Okay, and then we're going to create this kind of squiggly line. Just give yourself like a couple humps. It doesn't have to be, I don't know, it's honestly just like a weird wiggly line. I'm going to do that a little darker for you guys. This is going to be the top of that middle cloud. Okay. And then we're going to do one more. We're going to do this bottom line right here. So come across. I just decided we're not going to do the trees in the mountains. I feel like we don't have time, but we are going to, the most important thing is this wet on wet wash with the clouds. Okay. So we're creating this bottom line of the clouds right now. That's what we just did. And then this little cloud, we're going to do a squiggly kind of line in front. And that little cloud is in front of this middle cloud. So foreground cloud, middle ground, background. Okay. All right. So something like that is what your paper should look like. If it doesn't, don't stress out. We're going to go with it. And we're just going to see how it goes. Okay. So we're laying in our background wash of color. Remember, we're moving light to dark and back to front. Okay. So we're mixing this beautiful, yummy little light blue. Okay. And we're going to come in this background. Oh, shoot. See, I did it wrong. We're doing a wet on wet wash. April, Jeez. All right, I'm lifting out. Look at me lifting out. I'm lifting out. I'm so glad we learned that. All right. See, I never do the wet and wet wash, but this is a really good thing for wash. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put water on our background, okay? Mostly just right here. All right, because that's what we're doing. I'm moving it a little bit up over my line, but this pencil line was my guideline of how far I want that cloud to go. So I'm going to move back to my light yellow, wet and wet wash. You've already wet your paper. And then you're going to put your paint on top. And you can see, you'll be seeing, you can go over top of that masking tape. It's not a big deal. But you'll watch the paint sort of spread and go wild as soon as you put that on that wet. Now, like you saw with the pear, when you have it on a dry surface, it just kind of goes exactly where you put it. But when you have that wet on wet, it kind of goes a little wild. All right, so let's do the same thing down here on the bottom below our lowest cloud. So you can see my mistake. I'm going to lift it out using clear water. And I'm just putting a wash of water on my background. I'm wetting my surface to kind of prime the way for my wet on wet wash. And I'm using this medium light blue again. Lathering on my cake, back to the water when you need it to lather it up. And we're going to put that light blue right on. And if your surface is wet enough, you can see how it just sort of goes wild and has a little bit of fun. All right, so then you have this wash and let's keep this light blue on our brush. We're going to come back to this ugly brownish yucky blue down here, and we're mixing a slight shadow color to create these middle of the road right here. All right, so this is our middle ground. All right, so in this situation, you might be like, oh no, I hope I don't have an ugly blue. So you're going to test it out, and you can see that oh, that's nice. That's a nice medium blue. All right, so we're going to go in the middle of this cloud, and I'm not using wet on wet here because I want to be able to have a say in kind of like what it looks like. We are going to spread the highlight a little bit. So I'm following these guidelines that I've made. And if you're running out of paint on your brush right now, get a little bit more water, go back to the water and spread out what's already there. Okay. So now I have this middle of the road shadow color. It's between, the really dark blue that we're going to do and the light blue that we've already done. And I can tell I want to spread this color out. I'm not going to spread it all the way because I want that white to be my highlight, but I am going to spread it slightly up a little bit farther. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse my brush out all the way. And I'm going to just get water on my brush. I'm going to dab it off so it's not super soaking wet like before. And I'm going to spread this paint that's almost dry. So I'm kind of lathering it back and forth. You can see how I'm holding it. And I'm just spreading this blue that's already on my paper. And I'm going up a little bit farther to kind of spread out this tone. You guys see how that worked? And actually, we're going to flip on the upside and we're going to do the same thing on this side of this cloud. All right. See remember how this one, we're kind of mimicking this like dark blue that's here. We're going to take a dark blue now and we're going to go up a little bit. We're going to start with the light blue. So get back to your light blue. And actually, let's do that. Let's do a wet on wet wash, but let's be a little careful. We are going to follow the wet that we're creating. You can see I'm following this line that I've already made to kind of give it a playpen, because remember, this middle cloud right here is going to be the highlight. So I'm taking water and I'm following that line, but I'm not going too far. I'm not really going past this pencil line that I've made because I don't want it to go too wild. But now that I have water on there, I'm going to get a little bit of blue on. And I'm going to do that wet on wet wash, and you're going to watch it move around. And it is going to stay in your playpen. And then I'm going to spread that up a little bit. And I can already tell like, oh, my brush is wetter than I want it to be, because if I kept on spreading, I would spread the whole highlight out. So I'm going to dab off my brush onto the paper towel. And I'm just going to spread a dry brush. And I'm going to spread this. So, because right here, your paper is dry still. So I'm spreading that cloud, that light blue cloud, up to the white till it kind of dissipates. Okay. And so that is sort of that middle of the road cloud that you have. And okay, so you have this middle of the road cloud, and then we're going to do our shadow. We're going to move to our darkest, most, actually, we're going to do this medium blue we haven't touched yet. And we're going to go on top of the wash. So by now, you know, one of the things I said, but we haven't talked about since we began, was that you want to make sure that your layers are dried in between, because if you don't, it's going to rustle your paper and it's going to get pilly and yucky and you'll get frustrated. So we're going to layer this darker blue on top of the light blue up here in the right corner or left corner, and right here on top of the light blue we just made. But the good thing is this is dry by now, right? So we have this medium blue, and in this case, we're going to test it out to make sure it's not too dark. See, to me, that's like a little bit dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dab my paintbrush in my water, and then I'm going to dab it to my paper towel to lift off some of that blue that I have. And then I'm going to test it again, and that's more what I'm looking for. Okay. And I lost a lot of my paint, so I'm just going to do it again. I got this middle of the road blue, and I'm going to go on top of this corner that I've already done. And I'm not covering this whole surface, okay? Because you don't want to cover the blue you just worked to create. So you can see that I'm just doing it on this top here. And then I am going to do it down here as well, but I'm going to do it on the bottom, right? So in this case, I'm following these pencil lines I've already made. And you can see that I'm sort of outlining this shadow of darker blue right behind the white. And I'm doing that so that the white cloud pops. Okay, so I have that. And then I'm going to spread out this blue. So when I'm spreading it out, remember, I'm getting a wet brush or a wet brush with like no color on it and maybe almost dry. I'm realizing like right now, like, oh, I want that. I want that more dry. Or I definitely don't want paint on it. And I'm spreading out this blue that was already here. Okay, and here's a tip. When you're spreading it out and you realize, I think Caitlin, you did this, when you have too much water on your brush, I can tell right here, right now, I've got too much water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry my brush off all the way. And then I'm going to bring my brush back on that exact same spot. And the bristles of your brush are actually going to pick up some of that water. And it's not a complete disaster. Now, if you have so much, what you can do is you can use a paper towel or something. And I'm actually like right now, what I'm kind of doing is that lifting out technique that we talked about for mistakes. But right here in this corner, I've got a little too much blue than I want. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift it out. So I'm going to get my paintbrush wet with a little bit of water, and I'm going to scrub that blue back and forth to get it out. And then I'm going to dab my paintbrush on the paper towel and lift it off. Do you see how I'm doing that? And that's about as good as it's going to get tone wise. So the lifting out isn't just for mistakes. It is for when you're trying to spread something around or kind of make it lighter than it was. And then what I just did is I mixed these two blues that I had. I had that dark blue up in the corner and the light blue. And I use just some water and a brush to mix those out. Okay. Take a deep breath. Almost done. Does anyone have any questions? I really feel like the clouds are way more complicated than the pear. So if you're like, this is too much, just, it's okay. You don't have to be good at the clouds. I think the layering is definitely a trickier technique to do. But anyway, but it's an important technique for watercolor. So does anyone have any questions? You guys are stars. Okay. All right. So we're going to come back to this bottom cloud that we haven't touched yet. And I want you to have a look at this, how it is, because it's definitely darker, and it's darker because it's lower. And we realized by looking at this example that the shadow is on the bottommost part of these clouds. And, but you have two tones here. You have this medium blue and you have a dark blue. Okay, so the first thing we're going to create is this medium tone right here, because why? We go light to dark and we go back to front. So this medium tone is lighter than this dark tone, and it's also behind it. All right, so let's figure out how we're going to mix it. I think we're going to use I don't really remember what I used, but I think I use this like muddy greenish brown and this medium blue. Let's see how that goes. I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. You can see I'm trying to go slow. And a dab of water because I want it to be a little bit lighter, and let's test it out. Okay, so cool. That's about what we're looking for, but we're looking for a slightly lighter tone than that. So if I was using acrylic, I would add white paint, but we're going to add water. Okay, because we're watercolor. So dab to your water and then go back to test it out. And that's when we're going like color to white, right? We're adding that water to get a brighter white, right? So we're going to come on this cloud and we're going to kind of cover this whole cloud. This is your first most cloud, your most front cloud. We're following these lines we've already made. It doesn't have a highlight because it's sitting under this. Well, the highlight is this color right here, but it doesn't have that bright, huge highlight that our other clouds have, and that's okay. And I can see right here, I'm running out of paint. So I'm going to dab to my water and I'm going to dry it off slightly on my paper towel, and I'm going to spread that color that's already there. Okay, so we're creating this middle of the ground blue, which if you missed it, I used this bright blue and this kind of pukey grayish color. I'm sure there's a proper name, Payne's gray or something like that. So that's going to dry right now. So we're going to let that dry, and we're actually going to move up and kind of create some little darker shadows here, which we're going to add about right here on this cloud that's above. Actually, we're going to do that in the middle of the ground blue. Again, that same grayish blue we just mixed, this bright blue and this pukey color, and add some water to it so it's a medium. And we're going to add some of this right here. Okay, and I kind of created a new line. We didn't have that before. Okay, so I have white on both sides of it. I have white below it. I have white above it. And I've just created the same blue here. And the way I get that movement is I kind of like go up and down. I'm using a lot of my brush, so I'm not totally on the tip of it, but I'm not totally on the whole side of it either. All right, and I just kind of created that because I want to have this dark shadow, but I realized I didn't have anything behind it, so it would have been a little bit too strong. All right, so now I'm going to dry my brush out, or rinse my brush out so there's no color on it. I'm going to spread that a little bit up and spread it a little bit up on the left as well. This is, yeah, that's really almost how that lifting out happens, but to mute that color that you have, you're going to get water on your brush and you're pulling it out like when we pulled color to white. All right, so now this bottom cloud is dry. So we're going to create the darkest shadow we've got. We're still using that same medium blue, which if your cake is too dry because it's been sitting here, lather that water on there. We're getting a really dark hue. And then we're going to move to this pukey gray. It's probably like a Payne's gray, but these aren't true colors. Okay, really dark. You see that? So I'm going to add a little bit of water, but I still want a pretty dark color, which to you it looks black, but to me it looks like a yummy turquoise, dark, rich, like really pretty peacock type of greenish, bluish. That's what you should have on that. If it's too dark, add a little blue. If it's too blue, add a little bit of that dark. And if it's too dark altogether, add a little bit of water and pull it out. Spread that color a little bit till you get what you're looking for. Okay. All right. So now we're going to add, this is our last bit of this cloud, and then we're going to be done. Okay. So we're on the very bottom of our clouds. We're just creating the shadow that's already here. So the bottom most of the cloud is mostly going to pretty much be a flat line. So if you want to do that first, you can follow that pencil line you already made. All right. And I can tell I'm running out of paint on my brush. So I'm going to dab it into the water. I'm not getting any more paint right now, but I'm going to spread what I already have. And then for that top part of your cloud shape that you're like, what do I do here? What do I create? What you're going to do is you're going to follow these lines you've already created. All right. So you're not going to go all the way up to here, but you are going to go up like middle of the way. Okay. Look at that, you guys. Same thing here on the bottommost part of the cloud. Same thing right here. You want to leave a little of that middle of the road blue that you created before. You do want to see that. You want to see that kind of peeking up behind your cloud. And I also want to do a tiny bit of that up here, which maybe I'm not supposed to. I don't know. I did it before, but I kind of like that. And a little bit up here, and a little bit here, and a little bit here. And then I'm going to spread that out. Okay, so now I've got these little highlight or these little shadows right here, right here, right here, right here, right here, and right here. And they're too strong. So we're going to get a little water on our brush and we're going to spread that shadow. Okay, so right now my brush, I've got just water, maybe too much water. So I'm going to dab it on my paper towel and I'm going to spread that out. You can see how I'm spreading it down from the top corners. And then I'm going to spread this up right here. And I'm going to spread it up right here. You want to reach that middle blue, but you don't want to completely cover it. You want to have a little bit of that dark. And then actually even the cool thing about watercolor is that when your colors have already dried, but it's not completely dry, like 2 days later, although you really could come back to the pair 2 days later and put water on it and really not fix it in a nice way, but you could lift the paint out. Well, the cool thing about this is that even though this is mostly dry, I can still come back with a little bit of water and I can move. Now you can do this right when it's completely wet, which might be a little bit easier. But sometimes the time gets away from you and you really don't get to do it as quickly as you want to. But you can bring that water to your brush, to your surface, and you can spread it out. Okay. So these clouds don't look exactly like the sample, but they're a little more simplified, but they do have a similar, what was important that you learned in this process was we really layered that paint more so than we did with the pear. And we did that wet on wet wash to create that fun. Wet on wet wash really is like such a fun way to create a fun background that is sort of whimsical, a whimsical type of watercolor, that wet on wet wash, which it's really kind of special. I mean, you can do that with acrylics, which actually sometimes I do, but mostly that's really characteristic to watercolors. Okay. So our clouds are done. How do you guys feel about the clouds? We're a few minutes over class, so I'm sorry about that. But if you want to show me your clouds in your screen, I'd love to see them. Or your pear, show me your favorite, whether it was the pear, if it was your pear, was your favorite, show me your pear. If you like the clouds the most, oh, that looks good. You guys did really good. Oh my gosh. Okay, can I get a show of hands? If the pear was your favorite, raise your hand. Okay, if the clouds were your favorite, raise your hand. Did you guys find the clouds a lot harder? Yeah, okay. I did too. But you know, the cool thing is like the more comfortable you get with the clouds and with that layering and that wet on wet wash, it's really a technique, and it's kind of unique to watercolor, but it's a good muscle to practice. Okay, well, this sort of concludes our class. I hope you guys have had fun. I am going to stay on and I am going to do these fun little bonus content of 2 texture techniques. So if you want to stay on and watch those, that's when we'll use the saran wrap and we'll use the salt. You don't have to. I know some of you might be pressed for time, but I hope you had fun. This has been such a fun class to teach live, and I've loved being able to interact with you guys a little bit. But now I'm going to scooch to show you guys the 2 bonus techniques. So if you are already out of watercolor space, you really could do these techniques in like a top corner of your practice sheet or something like that. I'm moving to a new sheet just for the sake of so you can see something that's sort of crisp and together. But these are 2 little fun texture techniques. And the first one I'm going to show you is this salt technique. So the only time I've used this is when I did, well, I thought it was really cool the first time I learned it. So that's why I did it. But I used this technique for like a texture on this sort of abstract moon painting that I had done. And what happens is the salt sort of reacts with we're going to do a wet on wet wash. The salt sort of reacts with it, and it creates a little texture when it dries. So I don't know where you would use this except for fun, or if you wanted a texture on something that you were painting, you could use it for that. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get your piece of paper and you're going to do the wet on wet wash. So we just did this with the watercolor clouds, and now we're going to create just a background wet wash of water. And you can see I've got a little bit of color on my brush, but it's not a big deal. And I'm going to kind of do like a fun little blend of like a teal, purpley, night inspired sky color blend. So I'm starting with that same medium blue that I use, and I'm doing the wet on wet wash. So my surface is wet right now. And then I'm going to let that blue sort of pool around. You can see right away, this blue is like loving the fact that it can go everywhere, because the reason it's able to do that is because I have lathered the paper with water already. So if I hadn't done that, it really wouldn't move around like that, right? So I'm creating this wet on wet wash, and I'm going to move to a second color just for fun. I've gone back to my water, and I'm going to use this teal color, and I'm going to lay the teal right next to the blue. And I'm going back to my water. I'm going to spread it out a little bit more, but you do want this sort of like tonal. You don't have to. I'm just showing you the technique, but you do want enough paint on there so that when we put the salt on there, it'll react. So the thing about this technique is you really won't see the full impact of it until when it dries, like tomorrow or something. Well, if it dried tonight, but you know, when it's all the way dry, you can see I'm kind of making this blend of like weird. I went back to this brown, which you can see brown will make it go wild real quick. And a little shadow on the bottom. Okay, so once you have your wash done, then you're going to take some salt. Now I have this, it's pink salt, but it's not it doesn't have to be pink. It can be anything, but it's not a thick. I want you to watch this. I'm dropping it on the surface, and I'm going to show it up top to you, but you can sort of see how the paint like kind of sucks to it or sucks away from it. And I have one that's dry that I'll show you. And actually, so once it dries, what'll happen is you're gonna have these little lighter spots where the paint has sort of pulled around it. And it kind of gives this like dreamy sky, like night sky type of situation. So if you got into abstract, this is like a fun texture style to do, or if you want to, I do a lot of text in my work. So I would do this for a fun background, but this is sort of, I use purple in my sample, but you can sort of see, I've actually rubbed all the salts off of this. So once it's dry, you can rub the salt off of it, but it still looks like there's salt on there. It still looks like it has this, it kind of creates this look of a texture, but it's actually smooth. I mean, y'all can't really see that, but it's smooth. There's nothing on it. There's no salt on it, but it has this texture. So the cool thing is it looks like texture. So you could come back over it with whatever, a layer of some other color. You could come back over it with text or a felt tip pen and do some sort of fun over top, but your surface is smooth, but it doesn't look smooth. I really thought this was a really fun one the first time I did it. And it looks cool. So that's how you do it. You do your wet on wet wash, and then you put your salt on, and you let it dry. You really won't see the full impact until it's dry. So in the morning, you'll have a little present for you, and you can scrub that paint off of there, or that salt off of there. And you're like, okay, the next one I'm going to show you is, I don't have a fancy name for it. It's just this, like, it's with the saran wrap. It does not have to be name brand. Okay, you can use any kind, even the kind that doesn't cut with the cutter good, you know, when you get frustrated because you're trying to cut your saran wrap. And it's from Aldi. I don't know who bought this. Someone was fancy in my house buying the glad. Okay, so all right, we're gonna start with our white paper. I'm going to switch over for you to see. Put the salt away. If you don't know me personally, I love salt. I put it on everything. And like, I probably have high blood pressure because of it. I love it so much. I love it so much. That's why it's my favorite technique. Okay. We're going to do the saran wrap one now. And don't worry if it's not the Cling brand, but I don't think press and seal will work. So if you're fancy like the press and seal, I can't help you. Okay, we're going to do pink for this one. Actually, I'm going to do a blend as well. I don't think, yeah, let's do the wet on wet again. And we're going to wet that surface. Wet that surface. Oops. And then I'm going to put some pink. Remember, you got to lather that cake really good. And it will it is going to be a little more fun if you have a few different colors in this. But you don't have to. This is another great background technique. So if you were doing background, I saw someone use this technique when they were doing like leaves, which is cool because it almost gives like a veiny look to it. So that's a great option. But I'm just doing a fun color wash. And this is when you use those harmonious colors, those analogous colors that go so well together. They're pretty, and it's pretty to look at. You can mix it, you can go wild with a clear conscience that it's not going to go bad. But if you're using those complementary colors, it's going to get real ugly real fast. Okay, so we've got our wash here. Mine's kind of fun and psychedelic. It's important to make sure it's pretty wet. All right, so then you take your saran wrap. Look at this cut. It's going to cut so, actually it didn't cut that easy. I thought it was going to cut so well. All right, so then you take your saran wrap like this, and then you're going to lay it on top of your surface, and you're going to sort of like crumple it up a little bit so that you can see this texture that's happening. Leave it kind of crumpled on there, and then you want to let it dry a little bit. So we'll just chat for a couple of minutes, really just chat for a minute, but let me hear from you guys. What was your favorite part of the workshop? What was your favorite thing to learn? Tell me. You don't all have to, maybe somebody say, what was your favorite thing to learn? Teresa.
Oh, sorry. My favorite thing was actually learning how to do the small thin lines with the brush.
Okay, hold on.
You can't hear me?
I can't hear you, but that's because my ears are bad. Let me see. Okay, go again. What was
So
your favorite thing to learn?
my favorite part was learning how to draw the thin line with this, like loose-handed and not so tight like I'm writing with a pencil. So
Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
really
Yeah.
thin lines, yeah. Thin and
Oh.
then pushing down to make like a thicker line. Like that was my favorite part.
Okay, good. I love that. Anybody else?
We have never, I mean, I've never done watercolor before. And so it was
Yes.
really fun to try.
Did you
I
feel like
really
you
enjoyed
learned some
it.
good stuff?
I loved it. I thought it was great.
Okay, good. So awesome. Anybody else have a favorite part? So, hey, Hudson, I see you, boy. So good. I love seeing so many of y'all did this with your kids or with a friend. I love that it was something that was fun to do together. Okay. Does anyone else have a favorite? Okay. Teresa. Oh, Teresa. Hey.
Hi, so I'm a friend of Teresa's and we're doing it together. And I really like the blending. So being able to know what colors to blend well and
yes,
preliminary to like move it. I really like that part.
Yes, that is such a good, that is so good to know because it kind of gives you like a guide of, okay, I know I'm not going to screw it up if I go this route, but I think, that color blending applies to a lot of stuff. It applies in every medium, every paint medium. Colored pencils are a little bit easier. You definitely can layer those complementary colors in a different way. But yeah, cool. That's such a fun thing. I'm glad you like that. Okay, we're gonna go back to our saran wrap. And by now it's not completely dry, but it's pretty dry. And so I'm just gonna like gently lift it off. I mean, oh my gosh, is that not the coolest thing you've ever seen? So it gives you this sort of, this feels like sci-fi. I'm not a sci-fi person, but this kind of has like I don't know, like a dreamy sort of feel to it. I'm gonna hold it up close so you guys can see it a little better. But so that texture that was created was really just with the saran wrap and the way that the water had to pull away from it, or like the lightest parts means that the saran wrap was touching right on the paper and it kind of separated away from it. But that's a fun little different way to create a sort of abstract, fun background with saran wrap. And then once it's all the way dry, the same thing will apply. There won't be any texture on it. It'll be like flat to the paper, but it will keep that tonal difference that was in the watercolor. So thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you had fun. This was so fun to teach. I have loved teaching live and being able to interact with y'all. Follow along with us on social media, our Scripture Doodle Instagram. We share all kinds of little hacks, techniques, reels and just fun. I do a lot of portraits I get to share about. So, and we teach other classes. We're going to do a fun class in April and then another class in the summer. So if this was fun, share about it on your social media. I would be so grateful. And thank you so much for making it possible and joining me. I hope you guys have a great night.